Welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're looking at China's space program. And wow, there's a lot going on over there.
It really does seem like they're firing on all cylinders, doesn't it?
Yeah, from new rockets to, get this, a permanent moon base. We'll unpack all of that.
Right. And we'll see how these recent developments fit into their long-term space ambitions.
It's really exciting, actually. China's charting its own path in space, developing its own technologies, and setting really ambitious goals.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it so interesting to watch. They're not just replicating what others have done. They're really trying to make their own mark.
Exactly. Well, let's start with their newest rocket, the Chang Zheng 8A.
Okay, so the Chang Zheng 8A. This is really part of their push to develop more powerful and efficient rockets. And a big part of that is this new engine. It's a second-stage engine that burns liquid hydrogen and oxygen.
Ah, so that's a much cleaner fuel, right?
Exactly. And it also gives the rocket a significant performance boost compared to the traditional kerosene-based engines.
So it's a win-win then. Better for the environment and more efficient for getting to space.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, though. Does this new engine tech play into their future missions?
Oh, definitely. China's planning to use this engine tech in all their future medium and heavy lift rockets.
Wow, so that's a pretty big deal then.
Yeah, it really suggests a long-term strategy for them. Sustainability and performance seem to be key, especially for their more ambitious missions, like sending humans to the moon.
Which brings us to the other big news. China's spaceport expansions. I mean, they're really investing heavily in upgrading their launch facilities.
Yeah, they're expanding like crazy. Both Hainan and Haiyang spaceports are getting major upgrades. And we're talking multiple new launch pads here.
So what's the reason for all this construction?
Well, it's pretty simple. They want to be able to launch way more missions. I mean, their goal is to drastically increase the number of launches they do each year.
Okay, but how many launches are we actually talking about?
Get this. By 2027, they're aiming for 100 launches per year at Haiyang alone.
100? That's, almost 3 times what the U.S. is doing right now?
Yeah, you're right. It's a huge jump. And it really shows how serious they are about becoming a dominant force in space. I mean, this is going to allow them to deploy a lot more satellites for everything from communication to Earth observation.
So they're thinking long term.
Yeah.
And it sounds like they're also taking inspiration from SpaceX with their interest in reusable rockets.
Oh, absolutely. China's working on developing their own reusable rockets, too.
And do we know anything about their designs?
Well, the focus seems to be on rockets with diameters of 4 and 5 meters.
Okay, so similar in size to SpaceX's Falcon 9 then.
Yeah, exactly. So they're really aiming for reusability on a scale that could significantly lower the cost of getting to space.
And of course, if they could pull that off, it's going to shake things up in the commercial space industry, too. Potentially create some serious competition for companies like SpaceX.
Yeah, definitely a development to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
The landscape could look very different in a few years.
And all of this is happening while their human spaceflight program, Shenzhou, is celebrating a pretty big milestone.
Yeah, it's their 25th anniversary this year.
It's hard to believe it's been that long.
Mm-hmm.
From their first crewed mission back in 2003 to, of course, building their own space station, Tiangong.
Right. And Tiangong really is a symbol of their progress, showing their capability to operate independently in space. It's a platform for research, a stepping stone for more ambitious missions.
And speaking of ambitious, we can't forget about their plans for the moon.
Ah, yes, their lunar ambitions. China's goal is to land astronauts on the moon before 2030.
Which, I mean, if they achieve it, they'll be only the second nation to ever do that.
Exactly. And they're developing a brand new heavy lift rocket for this, the Chang Zheng 10.
They're even naming their future lunar hardware already. I read about the lunar rover, Tensuo, and their new spacesuit, Wangyu.
Yeah, they're definitely thinking ahead. And those names reflect their heritage, their aspirations. They're approaching this with a lot of thought and preparation.
And a lot of ambition. I mean, a moon landing is one thing, but they're talking about building a permanent research base on the moon.
Right, the International Lunar Research Station. It's a huge undertaking, but it shows just how far they're willing to go.
I mean, a permanent moon base. That sounds like something out of science fiction. What would it actually look like, and what kind of challenges would they face?
Well, think of it as a modular structure. It could be built using materials brought from Earth, but also resources found right there on the moon.
So they'd be using the moon itself to build the base.
Exactly. And that would involve some pretty advanced robotics for construction, Plus, they need life support systems that can handle the harsh lunar environment.
Okay, so not just a few astronauts huddled in a tiny habitat.
No, not at all. We're talking laboratories, living quarters for long-duration stays, maybe even facilities for resource processing.
Resource processing, what kind of resources are we talking about?
Well, one of the most valuable resources on the moon is water ice.
Ah, right. I've been hearing a lot about that. What makes it so important?
Water ice can be broken down into hydrogen and oxygen, providing breathable air for the astronauts, and even more importantly, fuel for rockets.
So the moon could actually become a refueling station for missions further into space.
Exactly, that's the idea.
It's amazing, but I can't help but think about all the challenges. I mean, the moon is not exactly a friendly environment.
You're right, the extreme temperatures, radiation exposure, micrometeoroids, all of that has to be considered. Protecting the astronauts and the equipment would be a top priority.
And let's not forget the logistics. Getting people and supplies to the moon, it's got to be incredibly expensive.
It will be a massive undertaking, no question. But China's investing heavily in developing their heavy lift capabilities. Like I mentioned, they're building the Chang Zheng 10 rocket specifically for these lunar missions.
So that's the plan. And are they looking at any partnerships to share the cost? I mean, I know they're already collaborating with Pakistan on a lunar rover mission.
Yeah, that mission is definitely a stepping stone towards this bigger moon-based project. They're working with Pakistan to send a rover to the moon's south pole.
The South Pole.
Yeah.
Any particular reason for that?
Well, that region is believed to be rich in water ice and other valuable resources. Perfect spot for a future base, potentially.
Okay, so it's not just about China going it alone. They're open to collaboration with other countries on this lunar endeavor.
Exactly. They have invited other countries to participate in this research station project, and several have already shown interest.
So it could really be an international effort then.
Potentially, yes.
And with that, I think we've covered a lot of ground here today. New rockets, massive spaceport expansions, a permanent moon base. It's really impressive.
It is. They're setting some seriously ambitious goals. And they're moving fast.
And we're just getting started. We still need to talk about their asteroid missions and their work on planetary defense. All that and more after a short break. So before the break, we were talking about China's lunar ambitions. And I gotta say, it's still kind of hard to wrap my head around this idea of a permanent research base on the moon.
It is pretty mind-blowing, isn't it? The International Lunar Research Station, as they're calling it, is a huge step forward for them. We're not just talking about short visits anymore. This is about establishing a long-term human presence on the moon.
But what would that even look like? How do you even begin to build something like that?
Well, the vision is for a modular structure, potentially built with a combination of materials brought from Earth and resources they find right there on the moon.
So they'd be using the moon itself to build the base. That's incredible.
It is. And to do that, they'll need to develop some seriously advanced robotics for the construction. Plus, you've got to think about life support systems, making sure everything can function in that harsh lunar environment.
Right, it's not exactly a walk in the park up there. So this wouldn't just be a few astronauts crammed into a tiny module.
No, much bigger than that. Think laboratories for scientific research, living quarters for longer stays, maybe even facilities for processing resources.
Resource processing, like what?
Yeah.
What kind of resources are we talking about on the moon?
Well, one of the most valuable resources up there is water ice.
Right, water ice. I keep hearing about that. What makes it so valuable, though?
Oh, it's essential for a sustainable presence on the moon. You can break down water ice into hydrogen and oxygen, which gives you breathable air for the astronauts and, even more importantly, fuel for rockets.
Wait, so you're saying the moon could actually become like a refueling station for missions going deeper into space?
That's the idea.
Wow, it's game-changing. But come on, we've got to be realistic here. There had to be some serious challenges in setting all this up.
Oh, absolutely. The lunar environment is brutal. Extreme temperatures, radiation, micrometeoroid impacts. Protecting the astronauts and equipment would be a constant concern.
And the logistics of getting all the people and supplies to the moon, that can't be cheap.
It's a massive undertaking, that's for sure. But China's putting a lot of resources into developing their heavy lift capabilities. Remember the Chang Zheng 10 rocket we talked about? That's being designed specifically for these lunar missions.
Right. And are they considering any partnerships to help with the costs? We talked about their collaboration with Pakistan on a lunar rover mission earlier.
Yeah, that mission is definitely a stepping stone toward this larger moon-based project. They're working with Pakistan to send a rover to the moon's south pole, actually.
Why the South Pole, specifically?
Well, that region is thought to have a lot of water ice, plus other potentially valuable resources. It could be a prime location for a future base.
So it's not necessarily just China going it alone on this. They're open to collaborating with other countries on this lunar project.
That's right. They've invited international partners to join in on this research station, and several countries have expressed interest already.
So it could actually be a truly international effort. That's pretty cool.
It is. International cooperation in space is always a positive thing, in my opinion.
Okay, so they've got the base covered, but how do they plan to communicate with it, especially if it's on the far side of the moon? Don't they need some kind of special satellite for that?
They've already thought of that. They launched the QuickO2 relay satellite a few years back, and it's already in orbit around the moon. That'll provide a communications link to the far side.
Ah, okay, so it's like giant communications hub in space.
Yeah.
That makes sense. But even with all this planning, this whole project is so ambitious. What kind of timeline are we looking at for a fully operational moon base?
Their target is 2035, but honestly, with projects of this scale, delays are almost inevitable. It'll require sustained investment and technological breakthroughs, and yeah, that international cooperation we were talking about. It's a huge challenge.
It's wild to think that in our lifetime, we could see a permanent human presence on the moon. It really feels like a new era of space exploration is beginning.
It does, doesn't it? And it's not just about the scientific discoveries or the technological advancements. It's about pushing the boundaries of what humanity can achieve. It's about understanding our place in the universe.
Absolutely. Speaking of pushing boundaries, we were discussing China's asteroid missions before the break. Their Tianwen-2 mission sounds particularly interesting, with the goal of collecting a sample from an asteroid that some think could be a fragment of the moon.
Yeah, it's a fascinating mission. Imagine studying a piece of the moon that's been out there, drifting through space for who knows how long, millions, maybe billions of years. Analyzing its composition could tell us so much about the early history of the moon, maybe even the formation of the solar system itself.
So it's not just about collecting a cool space rock. There's some serious scientific value in studying these asteroids.
Oh, definitely. Asteroids are like time capsules from the early solar system. They can give us a glimpse into the conditions that existed when planets were forming.
And it's not just about the past either, is it? There's the whole idea of using asteroid resources in the future.
Exactly. Asteroids are full of valuable minerals and metals, some of which are getting harder and harder to find here on Earth. Asteroid mining could become a huge industry someday, providing resources for construction in space, maybe even back here on Earth.
Asteroid mining, huh? Sounds like a topic for another deep dive. But for now, let's get back to planetary defense. We were talking about China's mission to test their asteroid deflection technology. What are some of the biggest challenges they're facing in developing this kind of capability?
Well, one of the biggest hurdles is accurately hitting a small, fast-moving target in space. You need incredibly precise navigation and guidance systems, plus powerful propulsion systems to make sure that impactor hits the asteroid with enough force to change its trajectory.
And I imagine there's a lot of uncertainty involved, too. We don't know exactly what every asteroid is made of or how they'll react to an impact.
You're right. Every asteroid is unique. Its size, density, internal structure, all these things play a role in how it'll respond to being hit. That's why missions like this 2029 test are so crucial. They'll give us valuable data to refine our models, make our deflection techniques more effective.
It feels like we're in a race against time, considering the threat these asteroids could pose to Earth.
It does feel that way sometimes. But it's also a testament to human ingenuity, our ability to come together and tackle global challenges. Planetary defense is something that affects all of us, and it requires international collaboration to get it right.
It's a reminder that we're all in this together, Whether it's space exploration or our own survival, we need to cooperate to succeed.
Couldn't agree more. As we explore further into space, that spirit of cooperation is essential. The challenges and opportunities out there go beyond any national borders or political differences. It's about our future as a species.
Well said. Now, we can't ignore the geopolitical implications of China's rise as a space power. They're really shaking things up in the global space race, aren't they?
They are. For decades, it was mainly the U.S. and Russia leading the way in space. But now, China is challenging that dominance, creating a multipolar space race, which has big implications for international relations and global security.
So the stakes are getting higher in this new space race.
Yeah.
What are some of the potential areas of conflict or tension that we need to keep an eye on?
Well, there are concerns about the possibility of space becoming militarized, competition over resources, and the risk of miscommunication or miscalculations that could escalate into something bigger. We need to establish clear norms of behavior in space, promote transparency, and encourage dialogue to minimize these risks.
So it's not just about technological advancements anymore. It's also about diplomacy and international cooperation to ensure a peaceful and sustainable future in space.
Exactly. Space is a shared resource, and it's up to all of us to manage it responsibly. That means open communication, collaboration on shared challenges, and a commitment to peaceful uses of outer space.
This deep dive has been truly insightful. We've covered so much ground, from China's plans for a lunar base to their asteroid missions to planetary defense. There's no doubt they're a force to be reckoned with in space exploration. But what does this all mean for the future of the global space race and humanity's place in the cosmos?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it's one we'll continue to explore as China's space program continues to develop. The next few years are going to be fascinating to watch.
I think it's safe to say that the future of space exploration is full of possibilities, both exciting and challenging. We'll be keeping a close eye on all the developments, that's for sure. And for our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into China's space program. Keep looking up at the stars and stay curious about what's out there. The journey of space exploration is just getting started, so we've been talking about all the amazing things China's doing in space, but we also have to talk about what this means for, the bigger picture. Their space program is really changing the global landscape of space exploration, isn't it?
It really is. For decades, space exploration was really dominated by just two players, the US and Russia, but now China is coming onto the scene in a big way.
Yeah, and they're not just following in the footsteps of others. They're really forging their own path.
Absolutely. They're developing unique technologies, setting ambitious goals, and really becoming a force to be reckoned with. It's changing the whole dynamic of the space race.
So we're moving away from that kind of bipolar space race we saw during the Cold War towards something more like, a multipolar space race, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just about national pride anymore either. Space is becoming more and more important strategically. It's about economic competitiveness, technological advancement, even national security. So as China gets more involved in space, it naturally raises some questions about, their long-term goals and how this shift in power might affect things globally.
I bet that's causing a bit of anxiety, especially in the U.S. I mean,
Right.
They've been the dominant force in space for so long. Is this kind of like a new Cold War, but in space this time?
Well, it's not quite that simple. I mean, there's definitely some competition between the US and China, no doubt about it. But at the same time, there's also this recognition that cooperation is crucial, especially when you're dealing with shared challenges like space debris or planetary defense, for example.
So it's not a clear-cut black and white situation. There's competition, but also areas where working together makes sense for everyone.
Right. Just look at the International Space Station. It's a great example of international cooperation. You've got the US, Russia, several European countries all contributing. And even though China is building their own space station, they're also open to collaborating with other countries, like on their Lunar Research Station project, for example.
It sounds like it's a delicate balance then, trying to figure out where to compete and where to cooperate in this new space age. What are the potential downsides if this balance goes too far in one direction or the other?
Well, if it's all about competition, then you risk escalating tensions, maybe even militarizing space. And that could lead to less collaboration, which would hurt scientific progress. In the worst case, it could even lead to conflict.
And if it's all about cooperation, is there a risk of, some countries getting taken advantage of?
Yeah, there's that risk too. You have to be smart about it. Unbalanced cooperation could make some countries vulnerable, maybe to exploitation or technology theft. It's a complex issue for sure.
So it seems like finding that middle ground is key. Competing when you need to, but also collaborating on those big challenges that affect everyone. And making sure there are some clear rules of the road to keep things safe and stable in space.
Exactly. Open communication, transparency, and clear norms of behavior are really important for reducing risk and ensuring that, space exploration benefits everyone.
That brings up another interesting question. With more countries and even private companies getting involved in space, how do we make sure that access to space resources is fair? How do we prevent a situation where it's only the wealthiest or most powerful nations who get to benefit?
That's a really important question, and one that we need to be thinking about seriously. The Outer Space Treaty, which was signed back in 1967, kind of lays some groundwork, But it's a pretty old document, you know? Things have changed a lot since
Yeah,
then.
man.
As space exploration evolves, we need to update these agreements and develop new frameworks to make sure there's equitable access, to prevent exploitation, and to promote sustainability in space.
It's a good reminder that space exploration isn't just about technology, it's also about responsibility. We need to be good stewards of this shared resource that belongs to all of humanity.
I completely agree. As we explore farther and farther into space, we need to keep that perspective front and center. The challenges and the opportunities that space presents are bigger than any one nation or political system. It's about our future as a species, and we all have a stake in it. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. This has been a fascinating look at China's space program. We've seen their incredible accomplishments, their ambitious goals, and how they're shaping the future of space exploration. It's clear they're a force to be reckoned with, and the coming years are going to be very interesting to watch.
They are. It's an exciting time for space exploration with a lot of potential for scientific discovery, technological innovation, and a deeper understanding of our place in the universe.
And it's a journey we're all taking together, so thanks for joining us on this deep dive into China's space ambitions. Keep looking up, and never stop wondering about what's out there. Who knows what incredible discoveries await us in the vast expanse of space?